Hello guys, this is part 45 of SQL Server. In this session we will learn about instead of triggers. Specifically we will be talking about instead of insert trigger. Before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 43 and 44 of this video series. In SQL Server, there are three types of triggers: DML, DDL, and logon triggers. DML triggers DML triggers are fired automatically in response to DML events. Example of DML events include insert, update, and delete. DML triggers can be further classified into two types: after triggers and instead of triggers. After triggers. After triggers are fired after the triggering action, whereas instead of triggers are fired instead of triggering action. The name itself suggests that. So in this session we will be talking about instead of triggers. Let's instead of insert trigger specifically. Let's try to understand that with an example. I have two table here. TBL employee on the left hand side, which has got ID, name, gender, and department ID. Columns, and TBL department table, which has got department ID and department name columns. Now let's say I want to create a view. Now let's say I want to create a view based on these two tables. This is the view, and I want to create this view on these two tables. Based on these two tables. So obviously I want the ID, name, and gender from TBL employee and department name from TBL department table. So obviously, to create this view, we have to join these two tables. So this view is based on multiple tables. So this view has got multiple base tables. Now let's say when I try to insert a row into this view, so I am trying to insert into this view, okay, and if you look at the view itself, it has got 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 columns: ID, name, gender, and department name. So if you look at the values that we are supplying to be inserted into this view, we have ID, name Valerie, gender is female, and the department name is IT, IT. So, but we know that a view is a virtual table, meaning it is nothing more than a stored SQL query. It does not contain any data. The view actually gets a data from its underlying base tables, in this case from TBL employee and TBL department. So when we try to insert a row, into this view, it should behind the scene insert that row into these base tables. Okay, so when I insert, look at this, we are inserting this row. Look at this, we are inserting this row into this view. So we are supplying ID, name, gender, and department name. Now SQL Server has a confusion, okay, which column should go into which table, or into which base table should this row be inserted, because we already have a row with IT. So should another row be inserted? So there is this confusion. That is why if your insert statement is affecting multiple base tables, then SQL Server will throw an error. Stating so. So this view is based on multiple tables, and your insert statement this is the insert statement, and your insert statement into this view will affect both these tables, That is why if you look at the error message, view or function view employee detail is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables, and that makes sense. Okay, so now let us see how to correct this confusion. Now let us see how to correct this confusion using correct this situation. How to correct this situation using instead of triggers. Now instead of triggers are usually used to update views correctly that are based on multiple tables. Okay, so since this view is since this view is based on multiple tables, and we are trying to insert data into this view. Let us see how we can make use of instead of insert trigger to correctly insert the row into the underlying tables. In this case, we need to insert this row. In this case, we need to insert this row into TBL employee table. So in order to do that, first we need to create this view. So in order to do that, first we need to create this view. So let's create the view. View is based on TBL employee and TBL department tables. So we have these two tables. TBL employee and TBL department. And then we need to create a view on those tables, and then we need to create a view on those tables. So create view. View name, as, and whatever the columns that we need, in the view, whatever the column that we need in the view. ID name, gender and department name. ID name, gender and department name. So select those columns from TBL employee. So select those columns from TBL employee join that with TBL department. Join that with TBL department on the common column. On the common column between these two tables is department ID, so department ID is TBL employee. In TBL employee, department ID is in department. So department ID in TBL employee, department ID in TBL, department ID in TBL department. So department ID in TBL employee, department ID in TBL department table. As you can see here, department ID and department ID. So let's create this view. So let's create this view. Now execute. Command completed successfully. Refresh the view folder. Where is the view folder? Here it is. Refresh this. And here is the view created. And we should see the view here, there. All right. So we successfully created. the view. Now let's try to select the data from that view. So select star from that view. So select star from that view. Press F5. You should see the data from the view. ID, name, gender, department name. ID, name, gender, department name. Now let's try to insert a row. Now let's try to insert a row. Now let's try to insert a row into this table. So obviously we are supplying the values ID, name, gender, and department name. Let's try to execute this. Press F5. Look at this. We get the same error. View or function not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. Okay. Now let's see how to correct this view. Using an instead of insert trigger. So obviously we need to create an instead of. So obviously we need to create an instead of insert trigger. So create trigger and give a meaningful name to the trigger. So create trigger and give a meaningful name to the trigger. Trigger usually have a tr prefix. Trigger usually have a tr prefix. So tr underscore the object on which we are creating the view. Here we are creating the view on view employee details. Underscore for which action you are creating this trigger. We are creating this trigger for instead of insert. Instead of insert action. Instead of insert action. Okay. We want this trigger to be fired for, I mean instead of insert. Instead of insert, so on this view, on this view, on this view, instead of trigger, as begin and. Now I don't have any implementation here. I have implementation here though. Here is the some implementation there. First let us select what is there in inserted. First select what is there in inserted and deleted tables. Now we know that triggers make use of two special tables. Now we know that triggers make use of two special tables called inserted and deleted. Inserted table will contain the newly added data. Deleted table will contain deleted rows. If you are updating, then inserted table will contain a new data, whereas deleted table will contain the old data. And we have spoken about these special tables used by trigger in the previous part 43 and 44. Okay, so let's create this trigger and see what is going to happen. Execute. Command completed. Command completed successfully. Now look at this. We have an instead of insert. Now look at this. We have an instead of insert trigger on this view. On this view. So obviously when you try to execute this insert statement, insert statement, so obviously when you try to execute this insert statement, since there is an instead of insert trigger, instead of insert trigger, instead of inserting this row, instead of inserting row into the view, it actually execute this trigger, and in this trigger you told to select the row from inserted and deleted tables, and that is what it will do. So let us try to do that. Now should not get an error. Execute it. Now we should not get an error. Instead, it will select the rows from inserted table and deleted table. So if you look at the inserted table, it has got the ID. It has got the ID that you have inserted, name, gender, and the department name. But the deleted table will obviously be empty because you did not delete any row from the view. All right. So now let us see how to actually create an instead of insert trigger. So now let us see how to actually create an instead of insert trigger that can correctly update the underlying TBL employee base table. So obviously you know what is your intention. When you execute this insert into, what is your intention when you execute this insert into view query? You want to insert this employee. You want to insert this employee. This employee into TBL employee table. So obviously you are supplying ID. That is the ID, which is 7, name Valerie, gender is female, and you are supplying the name of the department because you only know the department name, because you are trying to insert into view. Okay, but then behind the scene within the trigger, what you need to do? What you need to do is take this department name, from this table, and then retrieve the department ID from TBL department table, and then insert that department ID along with ID, name and gender into TBL employee table. So let us see the trigger. So we have this trigger here. So if you look at the implementation of the trigger, we are creating this trigger. on the view, on the view, on this view. Instead of insert, instead of insert as begin. So first we are creating a variable. So first we are creating a variable to hold the department ID, to hold the department ID. So which is of type integer, which is of type integer. And we are selecting the department ID, and we are selecting the department ID from TBL department table. Joining that with inserted table. And we have spoken about joins, in a great detail in the previous session of this video series. So please check them if you are new to join. So we are joining that with inserted table on the department name, on the department name. Because look at this, you have the inserted table here, and then in the department table you have department name. And department ID. So obviously you are joining this inserted table. So obviously you are joining this inserted table on department name. So you are joining this inserted table on department name. And getting the department ID from TBL department table. So once you have the department ID, what you need to do now is insert that into the employee table. But before that, look at this. If somebody specify department name, in this insert query as some garbage like this, Now in the department table, we don't have a department with this name. So obviously when this trigger gets executed, when this trigger get executed, department ID will be null. Department ID will be null because there is no department with that name. So obviously if a user is trying to insert a junk department name, then we should throw an error. And to throw an error in SQL Server, So that what is a check here? So that what is a check here? So that what is a check here? If department ID is null, we want to raise an error. Okay, and we are using raise error, for this. So invalid department name. So invalid department name, statement terminated. And then there are two other parameters, that we have passed in to this raise error function. The first one is the severity level. First one is the severity level, which we will talk about later, but we usually use 16. 16 means it is something that user can correct and resubmit the query, and the state which is usually 1, We will talk about raise error and exception handling in SQL Server in later session. I have already made a video on that, part 55. So if the department ID is null, throw an error. Throw this message. If department ID is null, throw this message. Raise this error message and then stop processing, and to indicate that we use the return, and to indicate that to stop the processing to indicate that we use return, we use the return keyword. So return from here, don't execute any further statement, don't execute these statement, this statement. Okay, so if the department ID is valid, on the other hand, then we want to continue to insert the row into TBL employee. So we are saying insert into TBL employee. Obviously, in TBL employee we have got ID, name, gender, and department ID columns. So into these column, insert the ID, name, gender, and department ID. Where is this department ID? Department ID? That is a variable which contains, that is the variable which contain the department ID that we have got from TBL department, got from TBL department table. So insert that into this TBL employee. So insert that into this TBL employee table. That's it. So let's create this trigger now. So instead of create, we need to specify alter. We need to specify alter because we have already created it trigger with that name. So press F5, command completed successfully. So we now have this trigger created on that view. So now we have created that triggers created on that view. So obviously when we execute this insert into, so obviously when we execute this insert into statement instead of the actual insert statement, look at this, I am supplying a garbage. Look at this, I am supplying a garbage. You know, this department does not exist. You know, this department does not exist. Okay. So when we execute this insert query, what is going to happen in the department table? If you look at the department table, you only have IT, payroll, HR, and admin. But in the query, you are inserting a garbage. So obviously, your trigger when it tries to get the department ID from TBL department, from when your trigger tries to get the department ID from TBL department table by joining the inserted table with TBL department. It will not find a department with this. With this name. In TBL department. So department ID will be null. So department ID will be null. So if that is null, then we throw this error. So if that is null, we throw this error. So let's see what happens. Do we really get that error? So let's execute this. So let's execute this. Press F5. invalid invalid department name, statement terminated. Okay. And obviously when you select the employee and department table, you should not have Valerie. You should not have Valerie record inserted. You should not have Valerie record inserted, because what happens after raising that error? Because what happens after raising that error? Just return. Don't process anymore. So this insert statement, insert statement will not be processed. Okay. But on the other hand, if we provide a valid department, so IT, I am supplying IT as a department name, and if you look in TBL department table, ID is 1, IT is 1. If you look in TBL department table, IT is 1. So Valerie record should be inserted into TBL employee with department ID is equal to 1. So let's press F5. One row affected. So let's select data from base table. So let's select data from base table. Employee and department. Look at that, Valerie is 7. Her department, look at that, Valerie is 7. Her department is 1. 1 is nothing. 1 is nothing but IT. Okay. Now let's try to select the same thing from the view. You should get that new row as well. In the view. F5. You get the new row as well in the view. Okay, 7 Valerie female IT. So if we go back to the slide, this is exactly the trigger. This is exactly the trigger that we have created. Now understanding instead of insert trigger is pretty straightforward here. You know, the key to understanding this trigger properly is to understand those special tables used by treasurers instead and inserted and deleted. And we also need to have a good understanding of joins, because to get the department ID we are joining inserted table with TBL department, and then obviously if the user is passing in garbage in insert query for the department's name which does not exist in TBL department table, we want to raise an error because we don't want to have a foreign key violation between TBL employee and TBL department tables by inserting that department. I mean, obviously the department ID does not exist there, so we raise an error. That's it. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. But before that, I also want to show the table, how to create that tables, because lots of student ask how to create that tables, employee table and department table. So guys, there is the creation of the tables. You can see it here. So guys, this is the table TBL employee ID, int primary key, name, gender, department ID. And create table TBL department, it is the department ID, int foreign key, references TBL employee ID, department name nvarchar 50. Okay guys, check it, write down and practice it. And this is the sample data inserted. Okay guys, thank you for watching, for listening, and have a great day.